Thanks for tuning in to this week's message from Salt House. My name is Rachel, and I'm on staff here working with the kids and families. Everything we do here at Salt House and beyond depends on the financial support and generosity of our community. Folks like you who show up or tune in each week and receive great benefit from the good and sacred things happening here. So if you love what Salt House is up to, I want to encourage you to contribute by donating. Go to salthousechurch.org/giving to learn more. And thank you for being such a faithful community.
Advent, these 4 Sundays leading to Christmas. This season for us, this particular year, we may be feeling spiritually, physically, emotionally, and mentally drained. We are tired of the political vitriol, tired of the us versus them mentalities, tired of the distrust and line drawing, tired of waiting for prayers to be answered. We come to this season of Advent weary for a world that will one day be made right. But that is not today. It is a world we can only glimpse, sometimes only through tears. Advent invites us to pay attention to the glimpses of promises made in the story of God to our weary world, promises of a restoration of all things to their true being, the goodness which was conceived from the beginning of time, a realized hope we've been longing for. For the days are coming, say the prophets of old. The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will fulfill the good promise. The promise of truth, the promise of compassion, the promise of restoration, the promise of justice, and the promise of presence. These promises are how we will orient our Advent journey each Sunday this season at Salt House, pulling us toward a future that we can only glimpse. Even as in our weariness, we wait. We know waiting for test results, waiting for the phone call, waiting for your kid to come back or the job offer to come through, waiting for your parents to get better or finally apologize, waiting for the family you longed for or that financial relief you desperately need, waiting for prayers to be answered or community to be found. We are very familiar with waiting. But this Advent, we don't wait in vain. This Advent, we explore what God has promised us. We squint together at the light that is far off and say, we are weary of waiting, so come, Lord Jesus. We are waiting and ready to see the weary world rejoice.
Good morning, friends. If I don't know you, I'm Pastor Sara. I'm going to stand back here because I was thinking of standing there, but I'm afraid of that fire. So stand right here. All right. Man, happy Advent. First Sunday of Advent, here we are. And friends, are you weary? Are you weary? Yeah, me too. For all those reasons that were just named. And I know that I don't have to tell you that it's December 1st and we officially are in the thick of it. So many sparkly, fun, good things, right? But also so many other things too that can be quite stressful. The shopping, the planning, the travel, the cooking, the events, the holiday cards. Do you send holiday cards? Is that you? Do you send Christmas cards? Yes? No? Nobody sends them. No. Okay, some do. Okay, some do, yes. So there are some really good gems out there, like this one. So merry, it's scary. Anyway, love it. So there's good stuff out there. We do send Christmas cards each year, and I have such a love-hate relationship with it. Are you with me on that? Yeah, I love sending out the love and greetings out into the world to the people that we love. I love receiving the cards, but it's always just this scramble to get it out. We always get some that bounce back. It's just it's kind of a mess, right? And in the most recent years, the thing that I've struggled with the most is what to say in the card about how we're doing. I like to give the little updates about our lives, and I love when people do that in their cards. But y'all, it's been hard to find the words. There's much that hasn't been easy in our families' lives in the last few years, and I don't know what to say or what not to say about it. Sometimes it feels even a little insincere or untrue to send this photo of the 4 of us and we're all yeah, it's good, right? I'm realizing what I want to say this year is just Merry Christmas. It's complicated, right? Have a good year, right? So I wonder if this resonates for you. And maybe it's not Christmas cards, but like, what do you say on social media? Or even you experience this at times when people just ask how you're doing, and rather than like find the actual response to that question, you're just like, I'm good, it's good, we're good, it's good, right? But maybe in your own way, this tension you're aware of, that tension that is there to actually speak of what is true for you. So Advent and Christmas, where we find ourselves in the story of God as we gather around this season is so rich, because we find ourselves reaching back to the Hebrew scriptures, hearing prophecy and promises and stories foretold that we begin to see coming to fruition in the events leading up to and in the actual birth of Jesus. It's just so theologically and narratively juicy, you guys. It's so good. And also what comes alive in the season of Advent and Christmas is that we get to lean hard into, as our series is focused on, we lean into the promises of God, especially now in our weariness. And as we see the weariness of our wider world, we get to ask, but what does God have to say about this? What is God going to do about this? And together, this season, we're going to mine the promises that God has given us. Beginning today we explore the promise of truth. When I first saw this theme for today, I was like, oh, truth, that's not like very Advent-y. was like my response. Oh, but then I got into it, I got into the text, and it's like, oh, yes, this is Advent-y. You see, we're going to ask, how does Advent invite us to see the world as it really is? Which is exactly that struggle that arises in us when it comes to something as simple as telling someone how we're really doing, or that holiday update about ourselves. Not to mention just like handling the reality of the chaos of our world right now. Because what I described for myself, what I wrestle with, is speaking the truth of my life as it actually is. The unedited version. And we can sense how there's like something in that is vital and important and vulnerable for us to pay attention to. And so we get to ask, why is truth in this way important? And what does the story of God tell us about it? So my friends, are you weary? Are you weary? Yes. And maybe you're not, that's fine. But yes, okay, some are. Well, then let's see what God has to say and what God promises to do, okay? You with me? All right, so when it comes to truth in the story of God, there are no better truth tellers than the prophets, right? The prophets of the Hebrew scriptures, they were chosen to speak on behalf of Yahweh. They were like the wireless Bluetooth speaker of God, right? Just like direct line to speak it out, speaking truth, calling out what was happening, calling God's people to repentance, calling them back to God when they had wandered off again and again, right? So biblical prophets, they're kind of a hoot because they're like socially awkward in ways that we can really identify with. But also, man, they're a favorite because they never shy away from hard truths. They speak plainly about the problems of the world. They weep and mourn for the brokenness, the pain, the suffering that they witness, which was especially true for the prophet Jeremiah. So Jeremiah was called the weeping prophet. He spoke of a fountain of tears with which he mourned the dead of his people. His heart was so tender. The book of Jeremiah, interestingly, is actually the longest book of the Bible, which I found surprising. I thought it was Psalms, but Jeremiah actually has more words than any other book of the Bible. It's also wildly complex. But here's just a small snippet of some of that truth-telling. So this is a piece of where Jeremiah is calling out infidelity to God. So let's read this together. It's at the beginning of Jeremiah 2:26 through 28. As a thief is disgraced when he is caught, so the people of Israel are disgraced. They, their kings and their officials, their priests and their prophets. Next slide. There we go. They say to wood, "You are my father," and to stone, "You gave me birth." They have turned their backs to me and not their faces. Yet when they are in trouble, they say, "Come and save us." Where then are the gods you made for yourselves? Let them come if they can save you when you are in trouble. For you, Judah, have as many gods as you have towns. So you get a kind of a picture of what's happening, right? So Jeremiah, the truth teller, he's addressing idol worship and other gods here. And in other places, he also calls out things like their cruelty, their destruction, their violence against others, just really Judah's complete abandonment of God's ways. And God says through Jeremiah, in all of this over and over, there's also like this voice saying, man, this is not going to go well for you, right? Sin like this leads to destruction and punishment. So that's one of those themes, is this kind of like the infidelity to God, speaking to that. Another big theme for Jeremiah is the promise of a new covenant. Also, Jeremiah warns of Babylonian conquest, saying, look out, because an army is marching to destroy you, and they do. Babylon comes and destroys Jerusalem. And our guy, Jeremiah, by chapter 32, he's actually writing from prison. He's living in the aftermath right after Babylon's destruction of Jerusalem around the year 587. He's literally in the rubble and ashes, seeing the fall and capture and death of God's people and the pain and heartbreak that went with it. It doesn't feel like a stretch for us to look around at our world right now. Gaza, Ukraine, Sudan, everything related to politics in the United States. It doesn't feel like a stretch to feel like we're sitting in our own rubble and ashes. Jeremiah notices the way that the world is and sees how it is not how it would be, not as it should be. He saw the world through tears, as our trailer said too. And when we look around with the eyes of a prophet, like we know our own tears for our country and for our world right now, and we also know our tears for how our own lives are not as they would be, not as they should be. The ways that they don't have an easy summary that fits on a Christmas card. Our own rubble and ashes. So my friends, just holding this with me, will you, in this moment, put on your Jeremiah lenses? Become prophets? Will you step back from, or maybe step more fully into your life, daring to see things as they really are? And dare to ask with me this question: what is a truth about your life that you need to name today? The kind of thing that you've been hesitant to accept as true. And it's not that you never speak about it necessarily, but you're just reluctant to hold it as part of your story. For me, this whole Christmas card update on my life thing, I realized that there were parts of my life that I don't want to write down on a page. Nope. Because I don't want it to be true, so I avoid writing the words. I thought I was avoiding writing that update because in some way, I don't want to have our friends and family have to deal with our pain. I don't want to be a burden to them. But now I know that it's not our family and friends that I think can't handle our difficult truths. It's that I struggle to. For me, so we can just leave that question up there because I want you to keep holding it, okay? So keep letting it just rise in you. So for me to answer this question, my reluctant truths include, I don't want it to be true that I had a brain injury 6 years ago. I don't want that on the resume of my life, that my capacity and body and life are forever changed because of injury. I don't want it to be true that my children have medical challenges and learning disabilities. We never want to see our children struggle, and it's so hard to parent through that. I don't want it to be true that my delightful younger brother was estranged from our family for 10 years, and there was so much life that we lost together. And I could keep going with more difficult, inconvenient truths that I have resisted and denied. And again, it's not that I never talk about them, but it's I don't really want to hold them as true. I'm afraid to admit those truths because the lie that I've told myself is that if I don't name them, then they somehow aren't true, right? Denial is such a convincing little jerk. But of course, it's all true. No denial or avoidance can change that. So I wonder what's coming up for you, your own difficult, reluctant truth. What do you not want on the resume of your life, yet there it is, right? What have you struggled to accept as true? And maybe it's about your own body, your health, your capacity. Maybe it's a truth that, you struggle with your finances or holding down a job or finding housing. The truth of our addiction or loneliness, our fear, our depression, our empty nest or our infertility. The truth about our sexuality or gender identity or gender expression. The truth that we are people who have lost a spouse or a child or a parent or a dearest friend. We have an Advent grief group that's starting this Wednesday. It'll carry through the next 3 Wednesdays. All are welcome. And I just think of each of those folks who wish they didn't have this truth in their lives, right? That they didn't have a reason to attend a grief group, even as it'll be so good for us to be together, right? So seeing the truths of our lives can include also truths of things celebrated, especially if we've been hesitant to really accept them. So the truth of our healing or our work in therapy or that you're showing up in a faith community, success at home or at work or in a relationship. But what is it for you? What is the truth you need to name today? So friends, as you might guess, this isn't just a question for us to ask today. But it's one that we get to carry with us, to learn to live with as we live into this way of God together. And this kind of attentiveness to reality is surprisingly, I find, disorienting and emotional and can cause additional weariness when I'm already weary. Who wants to be honest about their lives all the time? Right? But what helps is knowing how to move through the truths as we name them. And I just want to offer you just a real quick, simple kind of therapeutic tool that I've learned in this last year. I've been doing a lot of just deep work around seeing my life as it really is. And so, I'm going to go through this. There are tools and there are things that we learn that aren't necessarily spoken into existence by Jesus, and yet we can feel the Jesus that's in them. You know what I mean? You're oh, this is good stuff. This aligns with that way of Jesus. So they are the things that resonate with the way of Jesus. And so this feels like one of those things for me. So I just offer this as a process for you to use in this moment as you're kind of sitting in your own truth, but also as something to take with you as we continue to be people who try to name the truth of our lives and of our world. And it's simply this. It's moving intentionally through 3 things: awareness, acceptance, and self-compassion. So I'll just talk briefly about each. So first, awareness, and this is what we've been talking about. And it's been said that the deepest spiritual work of our lives is to pay attention, to be aware. And that's where this begins, to see things, again, as they really are, not through our lenses of expectation, not through our denial, but having awareness, paying attention, right? And then as we become aware of what is, things get even more challenging. So for me, what I've learned, my default setting after I become aware of what is, what I'm feeling or experiencing about something, is to immediately judge it. To hold it up against what I think should have been or should be, and whatever it is, it's just rarely cutting it compared to what my expectations were, right? Folks, I don't recommend this approach. Instead, try acceptance. Oh, and it just takes intention, because I know for me I just default into oh, this isn't what it's supposed to be, right? So try acceptance. We practice acceptance as we slow down and say, okay, this is. I will not resist it. I will not fight it. I will not deny it or judge it or try to change it. This is what is. This is true. And we still let ourselves feel deeply what we feel about it. If we're feeling sad, mad, angry, glad, stressed, overwhelmed, weary. Again, responding without also judging the response to it. Because there's no right response to what's happening to us. There's just our real response, right? So let that be that real response. So we open up and we accept what truly is. And then finally, we just extend self-compassion. It's a time to practice saying to ourselves a lot of, oh, honeys, and of course. Meaning it looks like this, oh, honey, of course you feel this way. This is so hard. You are still okay, even as this has happened. Just to treat ourselves with the same compassion we would extend to a friend who was trying to face their own hard truth, right? We choose to be gentle and understanding and curious and supportive and tender with ourselves, to say, woo, what a doozy. No wonder you feel this way. And just to be with ourselves in that with such compassion. So just these 3 things just kind of help us stay current with those truths in our lives without feeling paralyzed, without judging. So it's as simple and as challenging as this. And from experience, I can say it's just work that's never done. This practice, I will say too, is particularly helpful as we look ahead at the holidays before us with all the expectations, with the truths that come up this time of year. Just carve out time to be like, okay, what am I actually feeling here? Okay, how do I accept that? How do we be present to it? Okay, how do we be tender with myself about it, right? Like, just be intentional about moving through those pieces as we live through the holidays in this season, okay? You still with me? All right, I know you're doing hard work right now. This is not like, we're not laughing right now, and I know that. This is good work. But here's where it gets really interesting. So what's fascinating is that when we get curious about the prophets of the Hebrew scriptures, they take up some like 15 to 20% of the Bible, which is a lot. But what's fascinating is to ask the question of like, what was the point of the prophets? And of course, we can see how the prophets were chosen, again, to speak for God, which expresses how God wanted to speak to God's people and found a way to do that, which is just such a gorgeous reality of God's character, right? But in their efforts to call God's people back to God, to change what was happening, like, were the prophets effective? Like, did it work? Did people change? Well, honestly, rarely were they effective in affecting change. So why keep truth-telling? Right? Do you feel this question with me? I wonder about how the truth-telling of the prophets demonstrates what's only possible when we tell the truth about our lives. Because in the chapter after chapter in Jeremiah's difficult truths and pain and tears and anguish, there are these moments of promise, of God saying, yes, but I am still here. Yes, but there is so much to hope for. Of God saying, there is something there on the horizon. Yes, but look at what still is possible. And again, God, speaking through Jeremiah by speaking the truth, created the conditions for hope to be born. Hope born in the reality of what was. So it is for us. And here's why this matters. We cannot hope for a better future when we aren't honest about the reality of the present. We can't. Like, denial and avoidance unplug that possibility of a real, actual hope, the kind of hope that will actually draw us into that better future. Because hope for what could be is born in the reality of seeing what is and what isn't right now. Are you tracking? Does that make sense? Is that landing? Hope is born in our lives as they really are. As we do that work of truth-telling, of acceptance, and of self-compassion, as we said, the truth of our lives becomes the birthplace of hope. So hope is defined as the expectation and desire for a certain thing to happen. And to be clear for us to talk about hope, hope isn't a shimmery, like glowy ideal of warm, fuzzy feelings. Like, anyone who has lived through something knows that hope is one of the most precious, gritty, hard-earned things we have. Because for us to hope is glimpsed, again, from that place of things not being as they could be, not being as they should be. Hope is seen through tears. That's when we need hope, and that's when we find it. And again, woven through the book of Jeremiah, with its tears and destruction, and there in the rubble, there is hope. One of those places of hope is Jeremiah 33, 14 through 16. We heard it earlier at the beginning of worship. It's our text for today, really, and I invite you to read it with me. The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will fulfill the good promise I made to the people of Israel and Judah. In those days and at that time, I will make a righteous branch sprout from David's line. He will do what is just and right in the land. In those days, Judah will be saved, and Jerusalem will live in safety. This is the name by which it will be. I don't know what that word is. Is that all we have? Yeah. This is the name by which it will be called, the Lord our righteous Savior. That's the end. But do you see how here Jeremiah envisions a future where the promises of God that God has made to God's people all come together, like it's happening. And this is referencing the covenant promises like what was made to Noah and Abraham and Moses and David and the new covenant Jeremiah himself speaks of in Jeremiah 31. So Jeremiah describes it as a future that holds the gift of life and peace through righteousness and justice, and it will come through someone from the line of David, yeah? It's also the future that Mary sings of when the angel tells her about her son. Jeremiah reminds God's people, the days are coming. The promises have been made, and trust that the creative and redemptive work of God is happening. To look around and see things as they really are, and to also hear God's promises of that vision that offers hope for what will be. So my friends, into your life as it really is, these are words for us too. The days are coming. We have something to hope for. We have someone to hope for. Because it isn't only about what we hope for, it is who we place our hope in. For Jeremiah and for the whole story of God, God's people are invited to see what is possible, to hope for expected things as they place their hope in God. We find and are found by hoping in God. And the promise of truth, then, is that God comes to meet us there in the reality of our lives and of what actually is, where hope is born as we trust in God's promises for what will be. So you see, Advent doesn't have to be a season where, man, just like of airbrushed family photos and like perfectly decorated houses. It also doesn't have to be a season of ignoring and denying and resisting. Advent actually offers permission to see our lives and the world as it really is, while still hoping for a future we can only sometimes glimpse. And that's the part that's the biggest challenge for us in this. The challenge for us, as our trailer says, the days are coming, but today is not yet that day. Dang it. But what we do have today are glimpses of that hoped-for future. We call it the already but not yet. How in Jesus we know God's kingdom is like God's kingdom and God's way. It's already here, yet not yet totally here, right? That healing and wholeness and peace and reconciliation are unfolding in us and in our world, and yet, not yet. We just see pieces and glimpses of it. So friends, are you still wearing your Jeremiah lenses? You still a prophet, staying in that truth-telling prophet mode, yeah? Because we need truth tellers who are able to see, like the prophet Jeremiah, to see the glimpses of hope and promises of God that are there. We need you because our lives and our world desperately need hope. We need you to not only risk seeing your life as it really is and to hope from that place, but also to help others to see the truth of their lives too, and the hope. This is something we can help others see too. We can create safe spaces for truth-telling when we do our own. We can also be a mirror that is like ready to reflect back to others the wonder and the beauty that we see in them, as well as the bravery for when they are ready to see and speak of their life as it really is too. To help them be found by hope, to hope in God, to see God's presence and promise. Can you imagine the kind of healing and freedom that we can help unleash in our own lives and in our world if we live that way? As truth tellers, as willing to hold the truth of others too. But my friends, we can live this way. So I invite you to think of 1, 2, 3 people that you can talk to this week, sharing what has come up for you this day. Your glimpse of your life as it really is. To say, man, we talked about this at church this week, and I realize I tend to avoid naming this particular part of my life. I'm just so resistant to it. So friends, who might you share with? And as you do this week, just live through this week, can you keep those Jeremiah lenses on? Can you try seeing this world as it really is? So our band's gonna come back up. And we're going to spend these next few minutes singing as well as doing a little bit more reflecting, a little bit of writing, and a little bit of creating together. I'm going to walk you through that in a moment, but to be ready for that, we want to make sure everyone has that little strip, that bracelet that you should not be wearing. If you are, please ask for another. A bracelet and a Sharpie. Everyone's going to need one, so if you don't have one, just get your hand up and we'll get that to you while we're singing, okay? So have that. Then also, we don't need it yet, just be ready. And also, just to be ready, I invite you to begin to get curious about what hope might be too. So as we've named the truth, I just ask you to what does that hope begin to look like from what you've been speaking of your truth? So if you haven't already, just begin to ask God about that glimpse of hope in the midst of the rubble. And then the prophet Jeremiah noticed the way the world was not as it would be, not as it should be. He saw the world through tears. Yet he also saw something sacred shining through it. Long before the birth of Jesus, Jeremiah predicted his coming, and he told everyone, the days are coming, they are coming, when someone will come whose very name means truth and justice and love and compassion and peace and safety and righteousness to make all things right. So my friends, this is why we can live our lives as they really are and find hope for what's to come there. In our weariness, we wait, we watch, and we hope for that day together. Amen? Amen. One last thing. I want to speak a blessing for us. So this is a blessing for telling the truth. So I know you're already holding that Sharpie, but just roll your shoulders back. Maybe close your eyes and hear this blessing, a blessing for telling the truth. Blessed are you pulling on courage like a warm coat when you are in the first cold blasts of a storm. Blessed are you finding shelter and telling the truth about what has come, beginning to name your feelings and letting them flow. Telling the truth about where you are, not from where you think you should be or would like to be, but from the center of the truth as you know it. Blessed are you beginning to have an inkling that what once grounded you is still there at the heart of things. Those deeper, wider truths are your place to stand. That love wins and that kindness will prevail. And that at your core, you are not only lovable, but deeply, deeply loved. And in the meantime, blessed are you noticing the few small and useful things that can be done, even now, to make it a little better for somebody, maybe even you.